Hello everyone, this is Venom Geek Media here. Now, before we begin, I'd like to give thanks to my members, especially my commanders who can request video topics, and my centurions who will get access to exclusive artwork that I make increasingly for these videos, as well as all the graphics and displays that I make for other episodes as well. Thank you very much. Right, today we're going to be discussing the Maquis. This is something that has been really prompted by, you might say, recent historical events. I won't go into much detail because I like being monetized, but, the state of the world as it is has led me to increasingly think about the Maquis, and it's an interesting topic, and one that is somewhat ahead of its time. So in this, I suppose it's going to be like a lore crafting series. I may make multiple videos depending on the response to this, and depending on like what you guys say and suggest in the comments. Might be several different rabbit holes we could go down. First, I think it's worth giving context to the Maquis crisis and how it emerges, just to refresh everyone's memory. So, during the Cardassian border war, you have Federation and Cardassian colonies all over this frontier region, and they're all scattered and intermingling, and all next to each other and everything like that. So Cardassian border war obviously happens. With the conclusion of that, what they decide is, firstly, they're gonna give up some. They're all going to recognize some new borders, which kind of go down most of what was the frontier. Now, if you're stuck on one side of the border, you better get the other side. You either go to the DMZ or you go back to Federation or Cardassian space. So that's what happens to the was going to happen to the citizens of Dorvan. Now they actually become not Cardassian citizens, but they live under the Cardassian government. Now there's also the space in between the two powers, the DMZ. The thing with the DMZ is no military equipment is allowed in, so no weapons and no starships, which means these colonies are kind of left out on their own to police themselves. And this is kind of where the problem starts to emerge. Because these colonies, they're both Federation and Cardassian, don't get along with each other. And because no one's really there to reel them in, it doesn't take long before, a mini war starts developing. Because, they don't like each other, and they want to they want to basically clear each other off of what they see as their land. So, that's essentially, the circumstances that prompt the emergence of the Maquis conflict. So I'll get straight on to, answering the question, which is, what if the Maquis survive? What if the Jem'Hadar don't destroy the Maquis? Now, it's actually very easy to make this happen. We only need to alter one thing in the timeline. Eddington's arrest, that stands. Doesn't actually matter. In fact, it probably makes things worse. The only thing will change is that the Jem'Hadar don't come through the wormhole. Either the Bashir changeling fails its court, whatever, or it fails to sabotage Deep Space Nine, but for whatever reason, DS9 is able to seal the wormhole and the Jem'Hadar never come through. So yeah, we really start with the Klingon invasion of Cardassia, which is the biggest event in this timeline, and, were it not for the Dominion War, would have probably been the biggest event of the Prime timeline. It basically takes Cardassia out of the game completely. And with the Klingon invasion standing, okay, the Federation and Klingons never went to war. That might change or it might not, but regardless, the Klingons are there. And even when the Martok changeling gets revealed, they still stay there. And it looks like they're well intent on keeping it annexed. So I don't see the Klingons pulling out of Cardassia at all. I think they probably strengthen their hold over time. And what's the Federation going to do? Because the Klingons and Maquis are already there. So the Klingons will allow the Maquis probably to have something of a free hand, certainly on the Cardassian side of the borders. There's not much Starfleet can do. Starfleet's unlikely to intervene. They don't really have the political will. There's obviously a lot of sympathy towards the Maquis in some respect, and in another respect, they don't want to draw the ire of the Klingons by attacking the Maquis, who have kind of become their allies, nor do I think Starfleet would be very effective against the Maquis. I don't think a fleet of starships would be very effective against this asymmetric warfare that the Maquis employ, and I think the Federation would just, I think Starfleet would just get bogged down if it did try to intervene. What would then happen? You'd see increasing attacks on Cardassian colonies and raids and forays into Cardassian space, because bear in mind, a whole bunch of planets that were meant to belong to colonists were turned over to the Cardassians, so they'd lay claim to them, and then probably some more, just because they can at this point. I mean, the Cardassian military's been shattered, won't recover. We'd probably see more attacks like in For the Uniform, with biogenic weapons and the like, to drive off the Cardassians, and probably even more ruthless and worse. We'd probably see the Maquis perpetrating a lot of war crimes against the Cardassians. And this is really just substantiated by the fact that we see that they're perfectly willing, more than willing, happy to kick a man when he's down. The Klingons will probably annex their holdings in Cardassia, make them a permanent part of the Empire, and in turn, they'll probably recognise the formation of a new Maquis state that would basically take the territory that they claim. Now, when it comes to occupying territories, Klingons generally don't really do much. They kind of let people go about their business as usual, just as long as you're doing it as servants of the Empire. The Maquis, I think, would take great exception to Cardassians being on what they believe to be their planets. Now, this is where we get to some really nasty stuff. The Maquis would probably start deporting Cardassians either to the remnants of the Cardassian Union, which aren't much at this point, or to the Klingon territories, in which case, what do the Klingons do with all these extra Cardassians? What do you think the Klingons would do with all these extra Cardassians? They'll throw them in a gulag. So, yeah, it's not great, and the Maquis would probably be responsible for something akin to a Cardassian genocide, I think. I think also internally to the Maquis state, this is a insurgent group. There's a real mix of people, there's a lot of radicals there, and in those kind of things, generally the most radical and the most ruthless rise to the top. So you'd see increasing radicalism and violence in the Maquis state, and I think that will play into how this state conducts itself. I think it would be very aggressive. Revolutionary states, be they modern or historical, are generally not conducive to overall peace in the world. And we'll get to that. I'll briefly touch on the governing system. I think it would be something akin to a confederation. So I think the individual Maquis colonies would have a large degree of autonomy. There wouldn't be an overarching federal government. But what there would be a sort of central committee that is there basically to dictate their foreign policy and their defence. And that's how they organise. But otherwise, they're a loose confederation. And that might lead to internal instability, but chances are at this point, they'd actually just externalise all that kind of instability, because there's a lot of kind of opportunity for expansion out there. So this is really what I come to the point of. Like I say, revolutionary states are rarely good for overall world peace. And I think this would be exactly the same with the Maquis. I think they would likely sponsor, or at the very least offer moral support to similar kinds of resistance movements. Remember, the Maquis were not the only people displaced by Federation treaties. There's a lot of people out there who have been displaced by the various treaties that the Federation have signed. I think they would find common cause with the Maquis, and the Maquis would, with the cementing of their state and with economic support of the Klingon Empire, I'm starting to think like Maquis birds of prey would probably be a thing. I think they'd start pushing for those people to break away from the Federation and establish their colonies as independent and part of the Maquis Confederation. Again, another reference for this, I think, you look at revolutionary America, Was there a moral and philosophical allegiance between the two, a common cause there that led to the kind of motivated the other? And absolutely, you have to say that. And I mean, look what the French Revolution did. You know, I know Americans will look upon it favourably, but I, as a good Englishman, don't look upon that with so much favour. And so I think it would result in overall instability, particularly in the Federation border regions for the coming decades. I also think that potentially in the future of this timeline, that, you know, there would probably be something like a War of 1812, where the Maquis tried to liberate another part of the Federation in the way that the US attempted to liberate Canada from the British Crown and failed. We won, changed my mind. So yeah, that's really where what I think is perhaps plausible, what might happen in this timeline. This is a very different timeline. It's a very dark timeline. I think, you know, it's basically a federation that is fragmented, and it's like the ideal has not just been shown to fail, seems to be crumbling in this timeline. I think there would be a negative multiplier. Now, like I say, these are just my thoughts on what might happen or could happen. Like I say, I don't think the Maquis could ever take the Federation in an offensive war. Certainly not initially, but nor do I think the Federation could ever subdue the Maquis. Were Starfleet to send ships into the DMZ to try and root out the Maquis, I just don't think they could do it. I don't think they'd have the capacity to do it. I mean, you look at, again, modern day, look at insurgencies of various forms, and even when you try to be hearts and minds and all these things, eventually your voters get tired of it, and you have to pull out, and then the Maquis just immediately would come back, which is kind of what's been seen with Afghanistan, particularly now. And plenty of other countries. But in the end, it's like, you know, forces like that are very difficult to root out once they have taken hold. And I think that's probably the case for the Maquis. And I think that they would definitely result in, there would be wider implications of the success of a Maquis state beyond the DMZ and beyond the Federation Cardassian border region. I think it would, echo across the entire quadrant. So like I say, these are my thoughts. These are my closing thoughts. What are yours? Let me know in the comments below. Let me know if you'd like a sort of a continuation, maybe a discussion, or we look at other ideas like this. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below, and I'll see you in the next video.